about writing an APA report. We're going to go through all of the references. We're going to go through, and then we're going to do differential or descriptive statistics. So let's go ahead and get started. Don't ask me why I picked this one. That banana looks like a dolphin. Anyway, okay. Presenting research. Okay. APA style, and this is the book. I've got a copy of it. A couple copies actually. No, I don't. I only have the one. Anyway, this is the 7th edition. When I first started in psychology, that was back in the 70s. We were in the 3rd edition, and the 3rd edition, and there's a reason why it's changed, and the reason that the publication manual has changed so radically since its first inception in 1929 is because the way that you report or receive information it has changed so drastically. If you think about it, 20 years ago, when did I start my PhD? 25 years ago, there were no online databases, and then there were online databases, but there weren't very many. So you had to tell them what database you got your information from. Now, of course, the databases are fairly clean. You've got Google Scholars. You can find this stuff online. And because of that, they've had to change the information that they wanted. The information that they wanted before was to tell them where which database you were getting your information from. But now, of course, the information is on the internet, and because it's on the internet, it's readily available to anybody. It really doesn't matter what database you're dealing with; you're still dealing with the same information. And that's one of the reasons that we have the DOI number. The DOI number is really quite important because if you type that DOI number into the internet, it'll show you the journal article, or it'll show you some reference to the journal article. And this is one of the reasons why the robots, AI, has such a difficult time um, such a difficult time with research, creating research articles. One reason is because, and I keep talking about this, but they not only have good information, but they also have bad information. So when they write a paper for you and you've got 10 references, uh, part of that information that they have is not good information. And since it's not good information, it doesn't represent research. And because of that, it has to make up its own references, and That's how you catch people. Uh, that's how you catch people who are using a Chat GPT or some kind of a chat bot to write their papers because the references are bogus. They never existed. Um, RFK Jr. He's the Secretary of something, Health, Human Services, um, wrote a paper for Congress stating that both sides of vaccines. Well, the problem was that there is good research in favor of vaccines, but there's not good research that attacks vaccines. So what he was doing, he was using ChatGPT to write it, and some of the references that he had that were supposed to support his point of view uh, were not were not actual. They were not. They were bogus. Uh, they were made up. And he apologized. But the part of the problem is the conspiracy theorists. A lot of their information isn't good information. It's not accurate information. So that's part of it. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. APA style is a set of guidelines for writing in psychology and related fields. These guidelines are set down in the publication manual of the American Psychological Association. This one is this color. It's orange and red and blue. I've got a black one. I've got a maroon one and I've got a blue one. Uh, they come in all different colors. Every time they change, the eighth edition will be a totally different color, so that you can find them so easily. But the sixth edition was blue, and the fifth edition was black, and the fourth edition was maroon. And I don't have a copy of the third edition because that was when I first started on my PhD, and I didn't actually have a copy at that point. It's kind of broke at that point also. The publication manual originated in 1929 as a short journal article that provided basic standards for preparing manuscripts to be submitted for publication. It was later expanded and published as a book by the association and is now in its seventh edition. And this is it right here. The primary purpose of the APA style is to facilitate scientific communication by promoting clear writing and by standardizing the organization and content of research articles and book chapters. It is easier to write about research when you know what information to present, the order in which to present it, and the order in which to present it. APA style, this is MLA, this is what the MLA handbook looks like right now. Isn't that weird that they have the same color patterns? APA style is best thought of as a genre of writing that is appropriate for presenting the results of psychological research, especially in academic and professional contexts. It is not synonymous with good writing in general. You would write it in a modern language association style instead. That's the MLA. That's what the English department wants you to write in. But of course, we don't have any English majors. Maybe we do. Anyway, they teach you when you take English. They teach you a MLA instead of APA. And you would not write a newspaper article, even if it were about a new breakthrough in behavioral neuroscience, in APA style. You would write it in Associated Press style, AP style instead. At the same time, you would not write an empirical research report in MLA style, in APA style, or in the style of a romance novel, an email to a friend, or a shopping list. You would write it, of course, in APA style. Because APA style consists of a large number and variety of guidelines, the publication manual is about 400 pages long. It can be useful to think about it in terms of three basic levels. The first is the overall organization of an article covered in chapters 1 through 3 of the publication manual. Empirical research reports in particular have several distinct sections that always appear in the same order. Title page presents the article title and authors' names and affiliations. The abstract summarizes the research. The introduction describes previous research and the rationale for the current study. The method describes how the study was conducted. The results describes the results of the study. The discussion summarizes the study and discusses its implications. And then you have the reference list, which is probably the most important part because that tells us that you researched the article and that the information that you have is accurate. It lists the references cited throughout the article, and there is a specific way that you write all the references. Now, one of the reasons that I push this so hard is because when you graduate from Diné College and you decide to go to graduate school, when you go to graduate school, then they're going to expect you to already know the APA style. And if you are good at it, if you write everything in APA style because we taught you so well, then it'll make Diné College look better. And that's why Dr. Russ, Dr. Barber, and I all push for you to use accurate APA style. The second level of APA style can be referred to as high-level style, covered in chapters 4 and 5 of the publication manual, which includes guidelines for clear and effective writing. There are two important themes here. One is that APA-style writing is formal rather than informal. It adopts a tone that is appropriate for communicating with professional colleagues. other researchers, and practitioners who share an interest in the topic. Beyond this shared interest, however, these colleagues are not necessarily similar to the writer or to each other. A graduate student in California might be writing an article that will be read by a young psychotherapist in New York City and respected professor of psychology in Tokyo, Japan. Thus, formal writing avoids slang, contractions, pop culture references, humor, and other elements that would be acceptable in talking with a friend or in writing informally. New messages received from Chris. The second theme of high level APA style is that it is straightforward. Let me see what my son had to say. Come on. This means that it communicates ideas. Wait a second. Lab dead. Doesn't mean anything. Second theme of the high level APA style is that it is straightforward. This means that it communicates ideas as simply and clearly as possible, putting the focus on the ideas themselves and not on how they are communicated. Thus, APA style writing minimizes literary devices such as metaphor, imagery, irony, suspense, and so on. Humor is kept to a minimum. Sentences are short and direct. Technical terms must be used, but they are used to improve communication, not simply to make the writing sound more scientific. There is no better way to communicate that a between subjects design was used than to use the term between subjects design. Straightforward, that's why I put that picture in there. It's straightforward. Another important element of high level APA style is the avoidance of language that is biased against particular groups. This is not only to avoid offending people, why would you want to offend people who are interested in your work, but also for the sake of scientific objectivity and accuracy. For example, the term sexual orientation should be used instead of sexual preference because people do not generally experience their orientation as a preference, nor is it as easily changeable as this term suggests. And here are some black, instead of saying black attorney, just say attorney. Instead of saying businessman, say business person. Instead of saying chairman, say chair or chairperson. Cleaning lady, do not say it, say cleaner or maintenance worker. Instead of saying male nurse, just call them a nurse. Instead of saying manpower, say staff or personnel. And instead of saying secretary, say assistant or associate. Um, the third level of APA style can be referred to as low-level style, covered in chapters 6 through 10 of the publication manual. Low-level style includes all the specific guidelines pertaining to spelling, grammar, references, and reference citations, numbers and statistics, figures and tables, and so on. There are so many low-level guidelines that even experienced professionals need to consult the publication manual from time to time. At the end of APA, this explains when to hyphenate, use et al. Instead of the author's names. Okay, anyway. At the end of the APA style article or book chapter is a list that contains references to all the works cited in the text and only the works cited in the text. If you looked at other articles that weren't in there, don't put them in. The reference list begins on its own page with the heading References, centered in upper and lower case. The references themselves are then listed alphabetically according to the last names of the first named author. As in the rest of the APA style manuscript, everything is double spaced. Many different kinds of works might be cited in APA style articles and book chapters, including magazine articles, websites, government documents, and even television shows. Of course, you should consult the publication manual or online APA style resources for details on how to format them. And you can get all that information from either the online APA style format or looking at the publication manual. Sometimes it's a little tricky. And this is what a reference page looks like. This is the guy's last name. That's his first name, last name, first initial, last name, first initial. There you go. Nothing is capitalized except the first word. We're going to talk about that. Journal of Vision, the V is capitalized in Vision, italicized, the journal name and the volume is italicized. The issue number is not, and of course neither is the page number. So that's the way it looks. And you should always have a DOI number if a DOI number exists. And this is one of the ways that ChatGPT was getting caught, was the fact they weren't using DOI numbers. So and let me just explain something to you. If you put this DOI number in, you're going to get this. You're going to get this article. If you don't have a DOI number, you can always put the title of the article, high-level visual search in children with autism, and that should come up. If you don't have a DOI number, this will always come up. And if you think that somebody has used a bogus reference, one of the things you can do is look at Journal of Vision volume 22 and see if these guys are in there. And that's the way you do it. And if it's not in there, then somebody used a bogus reference. Now, it's possible to get this number wrong. That happens all the time. Or it happens from time to time if you don't copy it correctly. It's possible that you just said Abbasi or Rukab. That's possible. You know, sometimes with some of these foreign names, you don't know what is last name and what is middle name and first names. That's possible, but one of the ways that I've actually caught people using bogus references is by looking at the page number and seeing if the Journal of Vision, volume 22, this article is pages 1 through 17. And I will do that. I don't want anybody to use ChatGPT. I don't want anybody to cheat. So if I find that the DOI number is wrong, then I'll look at the title. If I can't find the title, then I'll look at the journal article or the journal itself, and all these journals are online. Volume 22, issue number 9, I'll look to see what is between pages 1 and 17, and hopefully it is this guy. Okay, that's the way it works. The reference includes a hanging indent, and we saw the hanging indent on this page. In other words, this line is not indented. The first line is not indented. All subsequent lines are indented, as you can see, and that's known as a hanging indent. Let me show you how this works. Let me show you how you can find this. I have to get out of this. Okay. All right. I need something. It's chapter 13. It really doesn't matter. Okay. Okay. Now, if you go, this is an Apple, and I don't know what it looks like in a PC, but this is the line and paragraph spacing, and I can go to line spacing options. If I go to special, I have first line indented or hanging indent. And this is with an Apple, so I'm not exactly sure how the PC works, but I can actually find a hanging indent, and I can change all my indentations to hanging indentations. Let me get out of here. There we go. That's the way it works. Sorry. Let's get back to our lecture. The reference includes a hanging indent. The first line of the reference is not indented, but all subsequent lines are. The author's name appears in the same order as on the article, which reflects the author's relative contributions to the research. So if you have 5 different authors and you go, well, I don't like that guy's first, that guy, I'm not going to put him first. The reality is that whoever they've got first, you've got to put first, because if you don't, then if you can't reference this article correctly. So you have to put it in the same order that they put them in. Only the author's last name and initials appear, and the names are separated by commas and an ampersand between the last two. And this is what an ampersand looks like. This is true even when there are only 2 authors. In the references, there is a comma before the ampersand. When you do the citation and you have 2 authors, there is no comma. There's just the last name, the first individual's last name, the ampersand, and then the second author's last name, and then a comma, and then the date. So I know that's kind of picky, that there's a comma in the references, but there isn't one in the citation, but hey, that's the way it works. Only the first word of the article title is capitalized. The only exceptions are for words that are proper nouns or adjectives, such as Freudian, or if there is a subtitle, in which case the first word of the subtitle is also capitalized, as in, oh, we didn't have a second example. In the journal title, however, all the important words are capitalized. So we saw Journal of Vision. The journal was capitalized, vision was capitalized, of was not. The journal title and the volume number are italicized, but the issue number, if in parentheses right after the volume number, is not. At the very end of the reference is a digital object identifier, the DOI number, which provides a permanent link to the location of the article on the internet. Include this if it is available. Some of the older articles are not. Some foreign journals do not have DOI numbers. But for the most part, all of your articles should have DOI numbers. I know it's a pain. I copy and paste, of course. I hate to write down DOI numbers because there's, it's kind of like somebody's email address. There's so many strange little things that they put in there, and it's the same way with the DOI numbers. So I always cut and paste my DOI numbers. But for the most part, you're going to have a DOI number, and that is the way that I check your references. I will look at all the DOI numbers. It can generally be found in the record for the item on the electronic database, such as PsycInfo, and is usually displayed on the first page of the published article. For journal articles, the generic format for a reference is as follows. This is what it's supposed to be. This is an actual example. We're talking about a journal article. We just looked at this. There's a period here between the journal title and the title of the journal, of the article. Jeez. This is what I was talking about. With 2 authors, there's a comma before the ampersand. There we go. You can see the American Psychologist 58. That is italicized. This is the volume number. That means they've been printing this journal for 58 years. And this is the 58th year. And this is 1, so that's probably in January. And these are the page numbers that you can find this. And then there you go. All you have to do is click on this number and it will take you directly to this article. For a book, the generic format and concrete examples are as follows. This is Milgram's book, 1974, Obedience to Authority and Experimental View. In the old days, we had to put where it was published. We don't anymore. With the 6th edition, we had to put where it was published. Now we don't have to. Yay. For a chapter in an edited book, the generic format and the concrete examples are as follows. This gets a little tricky. Um, this is the person that wrote the chapter. These are the authors. This is the title of the chapter, and it's in this book, Science and Pseudoscience in Clinical Psychology. These are the editors of the book: S.O. Lilienfield, S.J. Lin, and J.M. Lohr. They are the editors. If there was only one editor, there would not be an S here. And then you have the inclusive page numbers, and it was printed by Guilford Press. References for books and book chapters are similar to those for journal articles, but there are several differences. For an edited book, the names of the editors appear with their first and middle initials followed by their last names, not the other way around like it is with everything else. Anytime you write an author, it's always last name and then first initials. With EDS after it, in parentheses, um, only the first word of the book title is capitalized, with the exceptions noted for article titles, and the entire title is italicized. For a chapter in an edited book, the page numbers of the chapter appear in parentheses after the book title with the abbreviation PP. PP, there you go, just like that. Finally, both formats end with the location and name of the publisher, separated by a colon, followed by the DOI if there is one. Books and book chapters are less likely than journal articles to be published digitally and therefore less likely to have DOIs. When you refer to other researchers' idea, you must include a reference citation in the text to the work in which that idea originally appeared and a full reference to that work in the reference list. And this tells me that you got this information from this article. What counts as an idea includes phenomena discovered by other researchers, theories they have developed, hypotheses they have derived, and specific methods they have used. For example, specific questionnaires or stimulus materials. Citations should also appear for factual information that is not common knowledge, so that other researchers can check that information for themselves. Among the ideas that do not need citations are widely shared methodological and statistical concepts, for example, between subjects' designs or t-tests, and statements that are so broad that they would be difficult for anyone to argue with. For example, working memory plays a role in many daily activities, and of course that is not something that anybody would need to argue with. When you cite a work in the text of your manuscript, there are two ways to do it. The parenthetical style of citation follows the idea that needs to be cited and includes the author's last names and the year of publication in parentheses. Here are two examples. As you can see, there's no comma. It's Melly et al. That means Mel and others is what that means. So anytime in the old days, if you had up to, what was it, 8 authors, you had to write them all out. That was in the 6th edition. Now in the 7th edition, anything over 2, and it's all you just put in et al. So you don't have to write any others down. As interesting as that is, they changed it with the 7th edition for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why. Anyway, so this could be 3 authors or it could be 50 authors. It's really hard to say. And this one, of course, has multiple references. And this is the way you do it. You put a semicolon in between all the references. Berger, 2008, Holm and Morelli, 1979, and Milgram, 1963. And you do this in chronological order with the newest first and then with the oldest last. Notice several things. One is that the only authors' last names are used. There are no first names or initials. When there are 2 authors, their last names are joined by an ampersand. And when there are three or more, only the first author's name is presented, followed by et al. This is an abbreviation for et alia, which means and others in Latin. Notice also that the parenthetical style of citation is often placed at the very end of the sentence, which minimizes its disruption to the flow of the sentence. Finally, notice that when there are multiple citations in the same set of parentheses, they are organized alphabetically by the name of the first author and separated by semicolons. And I just showed that before. Okay. The second way to cite a work in the text of your manuscript is the narrative style, which uses the author's last names as part of the sentence, followed immediately by the year of the publication in parentheses. And Hellman Morelli, 1979, discussed several implications of Milgram's obedience study, and this one is in there as well. This is known as the narrative style. It gets kind of old when you put et al, et al, et al. So some people say and colleagues instead of et al. It seems to flow a little better. For this style of citation, it is generally better to use the author's names to refer to the people themselves rather than the research they did or the article that they wrote. For example, Mel et al. In 2007 found essentially no difference is better than there it was no difference in Mel et al. 2007. Notice also that in the narrative style of citation, when there are two authors, their last names are joined by the word and rather than an ampersand, and the year always comes immediately after the names. An additional point is that for this style of citation, the year only needs to be included the first time a particular work is cited in the same paragraph. The parenthetical style, however, always includes the year. There are no strict rules for deciding which of the two citation styles to use. Most articles and book chapters contain a mixture of the two, although the parenthetical style is much more common. The parenthetical style works well when you are discussing a general idea, and especially when you want to include multiple citations for the same idea. The narrative style works well when you want to emphasize the person who conducted the research, for example, if you were comparing the theories of two prominent researchers. It also works well when you are describing a particular study in detail. The sections of an empirical research report in psychology are the title page, abstract, introduction, method, results, discussion, and references, followed by tables, pictures, figures, and appendices. I am not going to talk about tables, figures, and appendices because you will rarely have them in your papers. And what I'm really talking about today is how you write your papers. An APA-style research report begins with a title page. The title is centered in the upper half of the page in boldface type with each important word capitalized. Now, I don't really force you to do these kinds of things. You can do it if you want, but I just want you to write your paper. I'm just real happy if I got a paper, and I don't really look for a title page. I'm not that interested in the title page. I think Dr. Russ is. I'm not sure how Dr. Barber does it. We've never discussed title pages before. Um, yeah, well, and I'm not really that picky. I'm not that picky about this. I'm picky about other things. The title should clearly and concisely, in about 12 words or fewer, communicate the primary variables and research questions. This sometimes requires a main title followed by a subtitle that elaborates on the main title, in which case the main title and subtitle are separated by a colon. Below the title are the author's names, and on the next line, their institutional affiliation, the university or other institution where the authors worked when they conducted the research. And of course, we're talking about an article that's submitted for publication. I don't really care. You don't have to put in there that you're from Diné College. I know where you're from. But you could put your class in there. That would be nice. And the date would be kind of nice too. As we have already seen, the authors are listed in an order that reflects their contribution to the research. When multiple authors have made equal contributions to the research, they often list their names alphabetically or in a randomly determined order. Professional papers that are being submitted for publication have a few additional elements. One is a short version of the title called the running head that appears in all capital letters in the upper left corner of each page. Another is a detailed author note on the title page that includes acknowledgments to the author's wish to make to agencies that funded the research or to colleagues who helped with it and contact information for the primary author. For student papers, running heads may not be required, and the author note may be replaced with information about the course name and number, course instructor, and date, which is a good idea. The abstract in an APA-style manuscript, the abstract appears on the second page, is a short, approximately 200 words summary of the study. Now, I don't require abstracts. I have known professors that did. I think Dr. Russ may. I'm not sure. It is on the second page of the manuscript and is headed with the word abstract in the center of the page. The abstract heading, like all the major headings throughout the manuscript, is in boldface type. The first line of the abstract itself is not indented. The abstract presents the research question, a summary of the method, the basic results, and most important conclusions. The introduction begins on the third page of the manuscript. The heading at the top of the page is the full title of the manuscript, with each important word capitalized as on the title page. The introduction includes 3 distinct subsections, although these are typically not identified by separate headings. The opening introduces the research question and explains why it is interesting. The literature review discusses relevant previous research, and the closing restates the research question and comments on the methods used to answer it. The opening, which is usually a paragraph or 2 in length, introduces the research question and explains why it is interesting. To capture the reader's attention, researcher Daryl Bem recommends starting with general observations about the topic under study, expressed in ordinary language, not technical jargon, observations that are about people and their behavior, not about researchers or their research. Immediately after the opening comes the literature review, which describes relevant previous research on the topic and can be anywhere from several paragraphs to several pages in length. However, the literature review is not simply a list of past studies. Instead, it constitutes a kind of argument for why the research question is worth addressing. By the end of the literature review, readers should be convinced that the research question makes sense and that the present study is a logical next step in the ongoing research process. Like any effective argument, the literature review must have some kind of structure. For example, it might begin by describing a phenomenon in a general way along with several studies that demonstrate it, then describing 2 or more competing theories of the phenomenon, and finally presenting a hypothesis to test 1 or more of the theories. Or it might describe one phenomenon, then describe another phenomenon that seems inconsistent with the first one, then propose a theory that resolves a inconsistency, and finally presents a hypothesis to test that theory. I would say an hypothesis. This was your author. In applied research, it might describe a phenomenon or theory, then describe how that phenomenon or theory applies to some important real-world situation, and finally suggest a way to test whether it does in fact apply to that situation. In the literature review, it is extremely important to start with an outline of the main points that you want to make, organized in the order that you want to make them. The basic structure of your argument then should be apparent from the outline itself. It is important to emphasize structure of your argument in your writing. One way to do this is to begin the literature review by summarizing your argument even before you begin to make it. In this article, I will describe two apparently contradictory phenomena, present a new theory that has the potential to resolve the apparent contradiction, and finally present a novel hypothesis to test the theory. Another way is to open each paragraph with a sentence that summarizes the main point of the paragraph and links it to the preceding points. These opening sentences provide the transitions that many beginning researchers have difficulty with. Instead of beginning a paragraph by launching into a description of a previous study, such as Williams found that, it is better to start by indicating something about why they are describing this particular study. Your goal is to construct an argument for why your research question is interesting and worth addressing, not necessarily why your favorite answer to it is correct. In other words, your literature review must be balanced. If you want to emphasize a generality of a phenomenon, then of course you should discuss various studies that have demonstrated it. However, if there are other studies that have failed to demonstrate it, you should discuss them too. Or if you are proposing a new theory, then of course you should discuss findings that are consistent with that theory. However, if there are other findings that are inconsistent with it, again, you should discuss them too. It is acceptable to argue that the balance of the research supports the existence of a phenomenon or is consistent with the theory, and that is usually the best that researchers in psychology can hope for. But it is not acceptable to ignore contradictory evidence. Besides, a large part of what makes a research question interesting is uncertainty about its answer. The closing of the introduction typically is the final paragraph or two, usually includes two important elements. The first is a clear statement of the main research question or hypothesis. This statement tends to be more formal and precise than in the opening and is often expressed in terms of operational definitions of the key variables. The second is a brief overview of the method and some comment on its appropriateness. Thus, the introduction leads smoothly into the next major section of the article, the methods section. The methods section is where you describe how you conducted your study. An important principle for writing a methods section is that it should be clear and detailed enough that other researchers could replicate the study by following your recipe. This means that it must describe all the important elements of the study, basic demographic characteristics of the participants, how they were recruited, whether they were randomly assigned, how the variables were manipulated or measured, how counterbalancing was accomplished, and so on. At the same time, it should avoid irrelevant details. The methods section begins immediately after the introduction, ends with the heading method, not methods, centered on the page. Immediately after this is the subheading participants, left justified. There you go, left justified. The participants subsection indicates how many participants there were, the number of women and men, some indication of their age, and other demographics that may be relevant to the study and how they were recruited, including any incentives given for participation. After the participants section, the structure can vary a bit. In one approach, the participants section is followed by a design and procedure subsection, which describes the rest of the method. This works well for methods that are relatively simple and can be described adequately in a few paragraphs. In a second approach, the participants section is followed by a design subsection and then a separate procedure subsection. This works well when both the design and the procedure are relatively complicated and each requires multiple paragraphs. The design of the study is its overall structure. What were the independent and dependent variables? Was the independent variable manipulated, and if so, was it manipulated between or within subjects? How were the variables operationally defined? The procedure is how the study was carried out. It often works well to describe the procedure in terms of what the participants did rather than what the researchers did. For example, the participants gave their informed consent, read a set of instructions, completed a block of 4 practice trials, completed a block of 20 test trials, completed 2 questionnaires, and were debriefed and excused. The results section is where you present the main results of the study, including the results of the statistical analyses. Although it does not include the raw data, individual participants' responses or scores, researchers should save their raw data and make them available to other researchers who request them. Some journals now require the raw data to be available online. Although there are no standard subsections, it is still important for the results section to be logically organized. Typically, the results section begins with certain preliminary issues. One is whether any participants or responses were excluded from the analyses and why. The rationale for excluding data should be described clearly so that other researchers can decide whether it is appropriate. A second preliminary issue is how multiple responses were combined to produce the primary variables in the analyses. A third preliminary issue is the reliability of the measures. This is where you would present retest correlations, Cronbach's alpha, or other statistics to show that the measures were consistent across time and across items. A final preliminary issue is whether the manipulation was successful. This is where you would report the results of any manipulation checks. The results section should tackle the primary research questions one at a time. One approach would be to answer the most general questions and then proceed to answer more specific ones. Another would be to answer the main question first and then answer secondary ones. BIM in 2003 suggests the following basic structure for discussing each new result. Remind the reader of the research question, give the answer to the research question in words, present the relevant statistics, qualify the answer if necessary, and summarize the result. Only step 3 necessarily involves numbers. The rest of the steps involve presenting the research question and the answer to it in words. The basic results should be clear even to a reader who skips over the numbers. The discussion is the last major section of the research report. Discussions usually consist of some combination of the following elements: summary of the research, theoretical implications, practical implications, limitations, and suggestions for future research. The discussion typically begins with a summary of the study that provides a clear answer to the research question. In a short report with a single study, this might require no more than a sentence. In a longer report with multiple studies, it might require a paragraph or even 2. The summary is often followed by a discussion of the theoretical implications of the research. Do the results provide support for any existing theories? If not, how can they be explained? Although you do not have to provide a definitive explanation or detailed theory for your results, you at least need to outline one or more possible explanations. In applied research, and often in basic research, there is also some discussion of the practical implications of the research. How can the results be used and by whom to accomplish some real-world goal? The theoretical and practical implications are often followed by a discussion of the study's limitations. Perhaps there are problems with internal or external validity. Perhaps the manipulation was not very effective, or the measure is not very reliable. Perhaps there is some evidence that participants did not fully understand their task, or that they were suspicious of the intent of the researcher. Now is the time to discuss these issues and how they might have affected the results, but do not overdo it. All studies have limitations, and most readers will understand that a different sample or different measures might have produced different results. Unless there is good reason to think they would have, however, there is no reason to mention these routine issues. Instead, pick 2 or 3 limitations that seem like they could have influenced the results, explain how they could have influenced the results, and suggest ways to deal with them. Most discussions end with some suggestions for future research. If the study did not satisfactorily answer the original research question, what will it take to do so? What new research questions has the study raised? This part of the discussion, however, is not just a list of new questions. It is a discussion of two or three of the most important unresolved issues. This means identifying and clarifying each question, suggesting some alternative answers, and even suggesting ways they could be studied. The References section begins on a new page with the heading References centered at the top of the page. All references cited in the text are then listed in the format presented earlier. They are listed alphabetically by the last name of the first author. If two sources have the same first author, they are listed alphabetically by the last name of the second author. If all the authors are the same, then they are listed chronologically by the year of publication. Everything in the reference list is double-spaced both within and between references. Review articles summarize research on a particular topic without presenting any new empirical results. When these articles present a new theory, they are often called theoretical articles. Review and theoretical articles are structured much like empirical research articles, with a title page and abstract, references, appendices, tables, and figures, and they are written in the same high-level and low-level styles. Because they do not report the results of new empirical research, there is no method or results section. The body of the manuscript still has a logical organization and includes an opening that identifies the topic and explains its importance, a literature review that organizes previous research, identifying important relationships among concepts or gaps in the literature, and a closing or conclusion that summarizes the main conclusions and suggests directions for further research or discusses theoretical and practical implications. In a theoretical article, much of the body of the manuscript is devoted to presenting the new theory. Theoretical and review articles are usually divided into sections, each with a heading that is appropriate to that section. The sections and headings can vary considerably from article to article, unlike in an empirical research report. But whatever they are, they should always organize the manuscript and make the argument clear. One of the ways that researchers in psychology share their research with each other is by presenting it at professional conferences. Professional conferences can range from small-scale events involving a dozen researchers who get together for an afternoon to large-scale events involving thousands of researchers who meet for several days. Although researchers attending a professional conference are likely to discuss their work with each other informally, there are two more formal types of presentation: oral presentations or talks, and posters. Presenting a talk or poster at a conference usually requires submitting an abstract of the research to the conference organizers in advance and having it accepted for presentation, although the peer review process is typically not as rigorous as it is for manuscripts submitted for a professional journal. In an oral presentation or talk, the presenter stands in front of an audience of other researchers and tells them about his or her research, usually with the help of a slideshow. Talks usually last from 10 to 20 minutes, with the last few minutes reserved for questions from the audience. At larger conferences, talks are typically grouped into sessions lasting an hour or two in which all the talks are on the same general topic. In preparing a talk, presenters should keep several general principles in mind. The first is that the number of slides should be no more than about one per minute of the talk. The second is that a talk is generally structured like an APA-style research report. There is a slide with the title and authors, a few slides to help provide the background, a few more to help describe the method, a few for the results, and a few for the conclusions. The third is that the presenter should look at the audience members and speak to them in a conversational tone that is less formal than APA-style writing, but more formal than then a conversation with a friend. The slides should not be the focus of the presentation, they should act as visual aids. As such, they should present main points in bulleted lists or simple tables and figures. Another way to present research at a conference is in the form of a poster. A poster is typically presented during a 1 to 2 hour poster session that takes place in a large room at the conference site. Presenters set up their posters on bulletin boards arranged around the room and stand near them. Other researchers then circulate through the room and read the posters and talk to the presenters. Posters are used by professional researchers in all scientific disciplines, and they are becoming increasingly common. At a recent Association for Psychological Science conference, nearly 2,000 posters were presented across 16 separate poster sessions. 16 separate. Oh man. Among the reasons posters are so popular is that they encourage meaningful interaction among researchers. Although a poster can consist of several sheets of paper that are attached separately to the bulletin board, it is now more common to create them using presentation software and to print them on a single large sheet of paper. Either way, the information is organized into distinct sections, including a title, author names and affiliations, an introduction, a method section, a results section, a discussion of conclusions section, references, and acknowledgments. Although posters can include an abstract, this may not be necessary because the poster itself is already a brief summary of the research. The font sizes on a poster should be large, perhaps 72 points for the title and author's names and 28 points for the main text. The information should be organized into sections with clear headings, and text should be blocked into sentences or bulleted points rather than paragraphs. It is better for it to be organized in columns and flow from top to bottom rather than to be organized in rows that flow across the poster. This makes it easier for multiple people to read at the same time without bumping into each other. Posters often include elements that add visual interest, such as colorful figures, copies of visual stimuli, or photographs of the research apparatus. They can also include purely decorative elements, although it is best not to overdo these. And that is the end of chapter 11. So let's get rid of this and go to chapter 12. All right. Now we're going to talk about statistics. And not my favorite topic. There are reasons why I did not teach statistics. I handed it off to Dr. Russ when she got here. Who did it before? Oh, Dr. I must have done it. I did do it for a couple of semesters. Yeah, Dr. Kine did it before. Yeah. Okay, we're going to talk about descriptive statistics. This is the simple stuff. We're going to talk about means, modes, and medians. Well, we'll get to that in just a second. Descriptive statistics refers to a set of techniques for summarizing and displaying data. Now, we're going to talk about inferential statistics next week. That's the last chapter, is inferential statistics. It's different from descriptive statistics. This deals with the raw data. That makes analyses. Inferential statistics makes analyses. So there are two. When you write a paper, when you do a dissertation or a thesis, if you do original research, you'd have descriptive statistics, that's your raw data, and then you have the inferential statistics that do analyses and make statements about your analysis. Okay, so this has to do with numbers. Descriptive statistics refers to a set of techniques for summarizing and displaying data. In some cases, the primary research question will be about one or more statistical relationships between variables. It is also important to describe each variable individually. Every variable has a distribution, which is the way the scores are distributed across the levels of that variable. For example, in a sample of 100 college students, the distribution of the variable number of siblings may be such that 10 of them have no siblings, 30 have one sibling, 40 have two siblings, and so on. In the same sample, the distribution of the variable sex might be such that 44 have a score of male and 56 have a score of female. One way to display the distribution of variable is in a frequency table, a table for displaying the distribution of a variable. The first column lists the values of the variable, and the second column lists the frequency of each score. From a frequency table, you can quickly see several aspects of a distribution, including the range of scores, the most and least common scores, and any extreme scores that stand out from the rest. The levels listed in the first column usually go from the highest to the top to the lowest at the bottom, and they usually do not extend beyond the highest and lowest scores in the data. When there are many different scores across a wide range of values, it is often better to create a grouped frequency table in which the first column lists ranges of values and the second column lists the frequency of scores in each range. Frequency tables can also be used for categorical variables, in which case the levels are category labels, which are often listed from the most frequent at the top to the least frequent at the bottom. A histogram is a graphical display of a distribution. It presents the same information as a frequency table, but in a way that is even quicker and easier to grasp. The x-axis of the histogram represents the variable, and the y-axis represents the frequency. When the variable is quantitative, there is usually no gap between the bars. When the variable is categorical, however, there's usually a small gap between them. And this, of course, is quantitative. When the distribution of a quantitative variable is displayed in a histogram, it has a shape. There is a peak somewhere near the middle of the distribution and tails that taper in either direction from the peak. Unimodal means it has one distinct peak, but distributions can also be bimodal, meaning that they have two distinct peaks. Distributions can also be more than two distinct peaks, but these are relatively rare in psychological research. Unimodal and bimodal. Another characteristic of the shape of a distribution is whether it is symmetrical or skewed. Symmetrical refers to a distribution in which the left and right sides are near mirror images of each other. This is symmetrical. The distribution on the left is negatively skewed, which refers to an asymmetrical distribution. A positively skewed distribution has a relatively long positive tail, and a negatively skewed distribution has a relatively long negative scale, with its peak shifted toward the upper end of its range. The distribution on the right is positively skewed, with its peak toward the lower end of its range and a relatively long positive scale. Tail, sorry, this is positive skewed, and this is negatively skewed. An outlier is an extreme score that is much higher or lower than the rest of the scores in the distribution. Sometimes outliers represent truly extreme scores on the variable of interest. However, outliers can also represent errors or misunderstandings on the part of the researcher or participant, equipment malfunctions, or similar problems. And this is an outlier. Whoops, this is an outlier. Everybody else is along this line, and this guy's way over here. The central tendency of a distribution is its middle, the point around which the scores in the distribution tend to cluster. Another term for central tendency is average. We will consider the three most common measures of central tendency, the mean, the median, and the mode. The mean or of a distribution is symbolized by a capital M, is the sum of the scores divided by the number of scores. And of course, if you add all this together, you get, that's 12, 14, 24, 31, or 41, 50. And if we, that's 40. Sorry. 40. And if you divide it by 8, you get 5. Okay, so the mean is 5. The mean formula looks like this. Mean equals the number of numbers added up and divided by the number of numbers. In this case, you add all this up, you get 40, and there are 8 numbers, therefore you divide 8 into 40 and you get 5. In this formula, the symbol sigma is the summation sign and means to sum across the values of the variable x. N represents the number of scores. The mean is by far the most common measure of central tendency, and there are some good reasons for this. It usually provides a good indication of the central tendency of a distribution, and it is easily understood by most people, because it also, another word for mean is average. In addition, the mean has statistical properties that make it especially useful in doing inferential statistics. An alternative to the mean is the median. The median is the middle score in the sense that half of the scores in the distribution are above it and half are below it. The simplest way to find the median is to organize the scores from lowest to highest and locate the score in the middle. Consider, for example, the following set of 7 scores: 8, 4, 12, 14, 3, 2, and 3. To find the median, simply rearrange the scores from the lowest to the highest and locate the one in the middle: 2, 3, 3, 4, 8, 12, 14, and that puts 4 right in the middle. In this case, the median is 4 because there are 3 scores lower than 4 and 3 scores higher than 4. When there is an even number of scores, there are 2 scores in the middle of the distribution, in which case the median is the value halfway between them. If we were to add a score of 15 to these data, there would be 2 scores, both 4 and 8, in the middle of the distribution, and the median would be halfway between them, or 6. One final measure of central tendency is the mode. The mode is the most frequent score in a distribution. The mode is the only measure of central tendency that can also be used for categorical variables. So if we looked at all these numbers, the mode would be 3 because there are 2 3s. That would be the mode. So let's get the mean of this thing. That's 20, 34, 38, 40, 46. 46, the mean would be 46 divided by 7 is, oh, my brain's not working. Oh no, my brain's not working. 46 divided by 7. 48. It would be 4.2 and 2 sevenths. 4 and 2 sevenths. I won't divide it out any more than that. Anyway. And we know that the mode is 3, and we know that the median is 4. So they're all right there in the same spot. In a distribution that is both unimodal and symmetrical, the mean, median, and mode will be very close to each other at the peak of the distribution. In a bimodal or asymmetrical distribution, the mean, median, and mode can be quite different. In a bimodal distribution, the mean and median will tend to be between the peaks, while the mode will be at the tallest peak. In a skewed distribution, the mean will differ from the median in the direction of the skew, i.e. the direction of the longer tail. For highly skewed distributions, the mean can be pulled so far in the direction of the skew that it is no longer a good measure of the central tendency of that distribution. That's 4/7, 4.4 and 4/7. Sorry. The variability of a distribution is the extent to which the scores vary around their central tendency. Of the two distributions on the left, both have the same central tendency. The mean, median, and mode of each distribution are 10. The two distributions differ in terms of their variability. The top one has a relatively low variability with all the scores relatively close to the center. The bottom one is relatively high variability with the scores spread across a much greater range. One simple measure of variability is the range, which is simply the difference between the highest and lowest score in the distribution. Although the range is easy to compute and understand, it can be misleading when there are outliers. Imagine, for example, an exam in which on which all the students scored between 90 and 100. It was a range of 10, but if there was a single student who scored 20, the range would increase to 80, giving the impression that the scores were quite variable when in fact only one student differed substantially from the rest. By far the most common measure of variability is the standard deviation. The standard deviation of a distribution is, roughly speaking, the average distance between the scores and the mean. For example, the standard deviations of distributions in the figures on the left are 1.69 for the top distribution and 4.30 for the bottom one. That is, while the scores in the top distribution differ from the mean by about 1.69 units, on average, the scores in the bottom distribution differ from the mean. Wait a second, I need to type something to my son. There we go. Sorry. The scores in the bottom distribution differ from the mean by about 4.30 units on average. Computing the standard deviation involves a slight complication. Specifically, it involves finding the difference between each score and the mean, squaring each difference, finding the mean of these squared differences, and finally finding the square root of that mean. The formula is on the left. And it seems more complicated than it actually is. An example of the computations for the standard deviation is illustrated on the left. The first column is a set of 8 scores that has a mean of 5. The second column is the difference between each score and the mean. The third column is the square of each of these differences. At the bottom of the third column is the mean of the squared differences, which is also called the variance. Although the variance is itself a measure of variability, it generally plays a larger role in inferential statistics than in descriptive statistics. Finally, below the variance is the square root of the variance, which is the standard deviation. So the standard deviation of all these numbers is 1.87. So the way we do this, these are the numbers. We subtract the mean from those. So if we subtract 3 from 5, we get -2. 5 from 5 is 0. 4 from 5 is -1. 2 from 5 is -3. 7 from 5 is 2. 6 from 5 is 1. 5 from 5 is 0 again. And 8 from 5 is 3. So then we square all those. So -2 times -2 is 4. 0 times 0 is 0. -1 times -1 is 1. -3 from -3 times -3 is 9. 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 1 is 1. 0 times 0 is 0. 3 times 3 is 9. So we add all of those up, divide by the number, We add all of these numbers up. These are the squares. We divide that by 8 and we get 3.5. We take the square root of 3.5 and that's the standard deviation. Okay, that's 8 numbers. If we had 30 numbers, it would be, it would be a little bit more complicated, but that's the way it works. In many situations, it is useful to have a way to describe the location of an individual score within its distribution. One approach is the percentile rank. The percentile rank of a score is a percentage of scores in the distribution that are lower than that score. Percentile ranks are often used to report the results of standardized tests of ability or achievement. In your percentile rank on a test of verbal ability were 40, for example, this would mean that you scored higher than 40% of the people who took the test. And that's what all that meant when they told you what your percentile rank of your ACT was. Another approach is a z-score. The z-score for a particular individual is the difference between that individual's score and the mean of the distribution divided by the standard deviation of the distribution. So it's z equals x minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. A z-score indicates how far above or below the mean a raw score is, but it expresses this in terms of the standard deviation. There are several reasons that z-scores are important. They provide a way of describing where an individual score is located within a distribution and are sometimes used to report the results of standardized tests. They also provide one way of defining outliers. Outliers are sometimes defined as scores that have z-scores less than -3 or greater than +3. In other words, they are defined as scores that are more than 3 standard deviations from the mean. Finally, z-scores play an important role in understanding and computing other statistics, as we will see shortly. Differences between groups or conditions are usually described in terms of the mean and standard deviation of each group or condition. Differences between group or condition means can be presented in a bar graph where the heights of the bars represent the group or condition means. It is important to be able to describe the strength of a statistical relationship, which is often referred to as the effect size. The most widely used measure of an effect size for differences between group or condition means is called Cohen's d, which is the difference between the two means divided by the standard deviation. So if we have, we're looking at two different variables, we take the mean of each one and we subtract it, and we take the standard, and we divide it by the standard deviation between the two. In this formula, it does not really matter which mean is mean 1 and which is mean 2. If there is a treatment group and a control group, the treatment group mean is usually M1 and the control group mean is M2. Otherwise, the larger mean is usually M1 and the smaller group is M2, so that Cohen's d turns out to be positive. So if we were doing research and trying to figure out if a treatment worked, say we were treating people with SSRIs and we had a control group that we were giving a placebo to, we might try to compare those two groups by taking the mean of group 1 of the experimental group and the mean of the control group and subtracting them and then taking the standard deviation and then dividing by the standard deviation to see if the treatment actually worked. The standard deviation in this formula is usually a kind of average of the two group standard deviations called the pooled within group standard deviation. To compute the pooled within group standard deviation, add the sum of the squared differences for group 1 to the sum of squared differences for group 2, divide this by the sum of the two sample sizes, and then take the square root of that. Informally, however, the standard deviation of either group can be used instead. Cohen's d is a difference between the two means expressed in standard deviation units. A Cohen's d of 0.50 means that the two group means differ by 0.50 standard deviations, or half a standard deviation. Values near 0.20 are considered small. Values near 0.50 are considered medium. And values near 0.80 are considered large. A Cohen's d value of 0.50 represents a medium-sized difference between two means, and a Cohen's d value of 1.20 represents a very large difference in the context of psychological research. Cohen's d is useful because it has the same meaning regardless of the variable being compared or the scale it was measured on. A Cohen's d of 0.20 means that the two group means differ by 0.20 standard deviations, whether we are talking about scores on the Rosenberg self-esteem scale, reaction time measured in milliseconds, number of siblings, or diastolic blood pressure measured in millimeters of mercury. Not only does this make it easier for researchers to communicate with each other about their results, it also makes it possible to combine and compare results across different studies using different measures. So we talk about Cohen's d. We talk about Cohen's d when we're trying to figure out how wide the difference is. And if it's low, 0.20, then we know that it's not very high. If it's half of a standard deviation, we know it's in the mid-range. If it's a little bit higher than that, 0.80, then we know that it's really quite high. It's almost one standard deviation difference. Be aware that the term effect size can be misleading because it suggests a causal relationship, that the difference between the two means is an effect or being in one group or condition as opposed to another. Researcher Janet Shibley Hyde has looked at the result of numerous studies on psychological sex differences and expressed the results in terms of Cohen's d. On the left are a few of the values she has found, averaging across several studies in each case. Note that because she always treats the mean for men as M1 and the mean for women as M2, positive values indicate that men score higher and negative values indicate that women score higher. So reading comprehension, women score higher. Smiling, women score a lot higher. Aggression, men score a lot higher. Attitudes toward casual sex, men scored a ton higher. And leadership effectiveness, women scored just a little bit higher. Many of the interesting statistical relationships take the form of correlations between quantitative variables. Relationships are often presented using line graphs or scatter plots, which show how the level of one variable differs across the range of the other. In general, line graphs are used when the variable is on the x-axis, has or is organized into a small number of distinct values, as with 4 quartiles. Scatter plots are used when the variable on the x-axis has a large number of values. Nonlinear relationships are those in which the points are better fit by a curved line. Nonlinear relationships are not uncommon in psychology. The strength of a correlation between quantitative variables is typically measured using a statistic called Pearson's R. Possible ranges from -1 to +1. A value of 0 means there is no relationship between the two variables. Values near plus or minus 0.1 are considered small. Values near plus or minus 0.3 are considered medium, and values near plus or minus 0.5 are considered large. Values of plus 0.3 and minus 0.3 are equally strong. It is just that one represents a moderate positive relationship and the other a moderate negative relationship. Like Cohen's d, Pearson's R is also referred to as a measure of effective size, even though the relationship may not be a causal one. With a small number of results to report, it is often most efficient to write them out. This is according to the APA. Statistical results are always presented in the form of numerals rather than words, and are usually rounded to 2 decimal places. For example, 2.00 rather than 2 or 2. They can be presented either in the narrative description of the results or parenthetically, much like reference citations. When presented in the narrative, the terms mean and standard deviation are written out, but when presented parenthetically, the symbols M and SD are used instead. M meaning mean and SD meaning standard deviation. It is important to use parallel construction to express similar or comparable results in similar ways. When you have a large number of results to report, you can often do it more clearly and efficiently with a graph. When you prepare graphs for an APA-style research report, there are some general guidelines that you should keep in mind. First, the graph should always add important information rather than repeat information and already appears in the text or in a table. Second, graphs should be as simple as possible. Third, graphs should be interpretable on their own. A reader should be able to understand the basic result based only on the graph and its caption and should not have to refer to the text for an explanation. It also should be in black and white. And there you go. Oh, we're going to talk about the error bars. Bar graphs are generally used to present and compare the mean scores of two or more groups or conditions. The smaller vertical bars that extend both upward and downward from the top of each main bar are called error bars, and they represent the variability in each group or condition. And this is the error bar right here. Although error bars sometimes extend one standard deviation in each direction, they are more likely to extend one standard error in each direction. The standard error is the standard deviation of the group or condition divided by a square root of the sample size of that group or condition. One reason the standard error is used is that the difference between two means is statistically significant if it is greater than two standard errors. This means that the error bars for the two groups or conditions will not overlap. Because error bars can represent different measures of variability, it should be noted whether they represent standard deviations, standard errors, or something else. Line graphs are used to present correlations between quantitative variables when the independent variable has or is organized into a relatively small number of distinct levels. Each point in a line graph represents the mean score on the dependent variable for participants at one level of the independent variable. In most cases, the information in a line graph could just as easily be presented in a bar graph. The convention followed by most researchers is to use a bar graph when the variable plotted on the x-axis is categorical and a line graph when it is quantitative. Scatter plots are used to present relationships between quantitative variables when the variable on the x-axis, typically the independent variable, has a large number of levels. Each point in a scatter plot represents an individual rather than a mean for a group of individuals, and there are no lines connecting the points. When two or more individuals fall at exactly the same point on the graph, this can be indicated by offsetting the points slightly along the x-axis. The straight line that best fits the points in the scatter plot, which is called the regression line, can also be included. And there is no regression line in this one, but it would be right there. Tables can be used to present large amounts of information clearly and efficiently. The same general principles apply to tables as apply to graphs. They should add important information to the presentation of your results, be as simple as possible, and be interpretable on their own. They are numbered and labeled similarly to graphs, and they can be placed at the end of the manuscript, but before the figures, or embedded in the text near where they are referred to. The most common use of tables is to present several means and standard deviations. usually for complex research designs with multiple independent and dependent variables. Every column has a heading, including the leftmost column, and there are additional headings spanning two or more columns that help to organize the information and present it more efficiently. The use of tables is to present correlations, usually measured by Pearson's R, among several variables. This is called a correlation matrix. As with graphs, precise statistical results that appear in a table do not need to be repeated in the text. The writer can note major trends and alert the reader to details, such as specific correlations that are of particular interest. Check your raw data to make sure that they are complete and appear to have been accurately recorded, whether it was participants, you, or a computer program that did the recording. At this point, you might find that there are illegible or missing responses or obvious misunderstandings. You will have to decide whether such problems are severe enough to make a participant's data unusable. If information about the main independent or dependent variable is missing, or if several responses are missing or suspicious, you may have to exclude that participant's data from the analyses. If you do decide to include any data, do not throw them away or delete them because you or another researcher might want to see them later. Instead, set them aside and keep notes about why you decided to exclude them because you will need to report this information. You can use a general spreadsheet program like Microsoft Excel or a statistical analysis program like SPSS to create your data file. Data files created in one program can usually be converted to work with other programs. The most common format is for each row to represent a participant and for each column to represent a variable with the variable name at the top of each column. And this is an SPSS file. Before turning to your primary research questions, there are often several preliminary analyses to conduct. For multiple responses measures, you might assess the internal consistency of the measure. Statistical programs like SPSS will allow you to compute Cronbach's alpha or Cohen's kappa. If this is beyond your comfort level, you can still compute and evaluate a split half correlation. You should analyze each important variable separately. Make histograms for each one, note their shapes, and compute the common measures of central tendency and variability. Be sure you understand that these statistics mean in terms of the variables you are interested in. Identify outliers, examine them more closely, and decide what to do with them. And this, of course, is an outlier. And that is it. My son's on his way home. I need to make sure the house is clean. Okay, well, I'll talk to you again next week. We have one more chapter, inferential statistics. Should be interesting.